Okay, so there's a core problem that every single person who wants to be a leader is going to be faced with. And that's the idea that everyone wants to be a leader who can both lift people up, but also achieve specific goals. And so typically what happens though is if people want to be able to achieve one, they're forced to give up the other, right? Like if they want to be able to achieve big goals, then it means that they're going to have to sacrifice their relationships with the people that they work with. Or on the other hand, if they want to really focus on the people, then it means focusing less on the goals of the company. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, mainly because I'm not someone who's really like achieved anything massive when it comes to leadership. You know, I'm 23 years old, I'm just out of college, and like a lot of people my age, I'm in this weird place where it feels like life is incredibly expensive. And so to really be able to kind of get to that next level, I think what it means for myself is that I need to learn how to take risks and work better with people so that I can set myself up for the best life possible. Okay, so let's think about it. What are some signs that someone is a good leader? Let's say number one, they can achieve company goals. Two, people enjoy working for them. And three, their work makes an actual difference in the world. Now, all of that might sound really nice and good and happy and whatever. But at the same time, it's one thing to talk about it and it's another thing to do it. And a lot of the ideas that I'm gonna be talking about today come from a book that I recently read called Leaders Eat Last by a man named Simon Sinek. And what I really like about him is that it's not your typical like self-help book like everyone else. It's not this like you have the leader inside of you and you can do better. It's none of that. It's like practical steps and stories about companies that have actually succeeded. This is insane. So I was recently on a Zoom call and there's a guy on there who is a top-notch business coach. Like he's gotten on all the different bestseller lists. He's one of those people who's really made like being a leader into his entire company brand. I'm sure that he's bringing in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And something that he talked about, this is ridiculous, but he was like, all of us deep down are amazing leaders. Know why? It's because we wake up in the morning and we lead ourselves. And I heard that and I just thought, that is it's one of the most ridiculous things I think I've ever heard. Because you wouldn't look at a bad leader and say that that's the evidence that they must be a good. You wouldn't look at a bad leader who's, failing their company, they're not treating their employees well. You wouldn't say, well, I don't know why he's being such a bad leader. I mean, look at the way that he wakes up in the morning and he leads himself. Like, that's not evidence. Being a leader is all about leading other people. Okay, so there's this central idea throughout the book, Leaders Eat Last, of the circle of safety. The idea is that whatever role that we play, there's a circle, right? And so in an ideal company, every single person in the company is in the circle of safety. Unfortunately though, that's not how it usually happens in really dysfunctional companies. Instead, what happens is the executives are in the circle and then their lower level employees are outside the circle. Now, what does that mean? What that essentially means is that when things get difficult, instead of acting in the best interest of the employees, instead, the executives only act in the best interest of themselves. What this does is it means that the employees can no longer trust the executives at the top, and this leads to much poorer work that's done, but then also they're not going to want to stay with the company for very long because they know that when things are going to get difficult, the executives of the company, they're not going to have their back. Okay, so let's think about like a modern political example. Politics is really easy because when it comes to politics, we're so quick to isolate the other side and make them the problem, even though we're all fellow Americans and we should all be looking out for each other. But let's say there is some sort of tragedy. You have President Biden and he needs to address it, right? So he's going to be the leader of the country, right? And so what does his circle of safety look like? What that's going to look like are Democrat politicians and Democrat voters. Outside the circle of safety is going to be Republicans, and not just the Republican politicians, but both the politicians and the voters. Now, what we see happen time and time again, when there's some sort of tragedy that happens, Biden's first instinct is going to be to immediately blame half of the country, which is everyone who votes Republican. He's going to say that they're the reason that these tragedies happen, and he's not going to take any responsibility for it.
You'd have to acknowledge we made enormous progress. One thing I haven't been able to do so far is get my Republican friends to get in the game of making things better in this country.
Now that word responsibility is so important to this whole idea. You see, when you have leaders who push away any responsibility when something bad happens under their watch, that is the evidence that they do not care about anyone who's outside their circle of safety. And I mean, at the core of it, everyone who's under your care should be inside your circle of safety. Now, a great example of a company that does this so well is the company 3M. And you might know them from a variety of different places. They make tools for building houses. They make stuff that they sell at Staples for back to school stuff. They make so many different things, and they do it all so well. Now, something that they hold as a central idea is the idea of sharing everything, all their discoveries, everything that happens, even if it's something that the person who discovers it doesn't think that it's useful or practical in any way. So an example of this is Post-it notes, which is kind of a funny example. Basically, there was an engineer on their team who ended up discovering that you could have an adhesive that was weaker and something that could be an adhesive but also easily rip it apart and then stick it back onto something. At the time, he didn't have any sort of use for it, but because of the way that their ideas were shared openly throughout the company, it wasn't long until another person who worked at the company found that whenever he was reading a book, the bookmarks would keep falling out of the page, and it made it super difficult for him. And so he started going through all the different ideas that had been shared with him, and he put together the idea to use a weak adhesive so that he could create these temporary bookmarks that actually stay in the page. And today, I feel like all of us have used sticky notes in some way. Now, when we think about leadership, something that has to stay really central to what we talk about is that everything is going to come from the top. Change doesn't start at the bottom, it starts at the top. Courage doesn't come from the bottom, it comes from the top. The way that the company is led from the top is going to come down and impact every single level of the company. And this is something that I've been thinking about with what's been happening lately with Boeing. I feel like most of us have seen the videos on social media of Boeing planes having doors flying off in the sky, or just that their planes have been falling apart. And it's shocking. I mean, they're one of the greatest American companies of all time. Like, think about just the innovation that they've had throughout this country and the way that they've shaped America and benefited so many Americans with the planes that they've created. But lately, just everything has been falling apart. And I recently saw a video of, it was either a senator or a congressman, but at the hearing that they did with the CEO of Boeing, and it was super interesting having this sort of breakdown, talking about how he's no longer being compensated for making amazing planes, but instead that the focus of the company has been on just putting out fires and trying to sweep as much as possible under the rug. And so if you think about it, when you have a company like this, and you have the leader of the company spending so much of his time trying to put out fires and trying to just hide their problems, sweep the problems underneath the rug, instead of taking responsibility for what's happening and pushing the company forward in the right direction, what's gonna happen is then the level of executives who work directly underneath him, they're gonna imitate that behavior. And then you think about the managers below them and then the lower level employees, what's gonna happen is that's gonna trickle down. But instead, if he made it his focus that we are going to create the greatest planes in the world, we're going to help people see their families more often who live in different places. We're going to help business owners get to where they need to be quicker because of the planes that we make. That attitude is going to trickle down and impact every single level of the company. An interesting example that Simon Sinek gives is Apple. And I mean, if you've read any business book, Apple is always like the teacher's pet, the perfect child. Everything they do must be perfect. But it was really interesting reading about why Apple has become so successful and kind of continued this legacy. And so something that Simon Sinek talks about in the book is that most companies are only innovative at the beginning. And then once they start to become successful and they have money, they lose their innovation. And so the reason that he believes, though, for this is because when you're starting out, you have way more constraints. Think about a startup company. They have a ton of constraints because they literally never know when they come into work and it could be their last day on the job. So because of that, they're always going to be forced to come up with new ideas. They're going to be way more open to sharing ideas because they know that having a good idea or having the right idea could have an incredible impact on every level of the company, and it could give them that long-term safety that they're looking for. But unfortunately, as companies grow, they oftentimes lose this mindset of innovation. The only time that they're actually innovating and having new products is when they acquire smaller companies that are already innovating. So what that tells you is that there's really little innovation that's actually happening within the walls of the company. And the reason is because once you're a billion-dollar company, you no longer have the financial constraints that are going to force you to constantly be thinking about new ideas, and you're just always going to play it safe. You're going to try to focus on what's best for the shareholders. You're not going to take any risks, and this is something that ends up translating down every single level of the company. Then when Apple goes and they make it their central goal to just make a dent in the universe, all of a sudden that's going to translate to every single level of the company. And I know that this is something that has definitely changed since the death of Steve Jobs. I mean, it seemed like every couple of years he had this crazy new invention for something incredible, and it feels like that's definitely slowed down. And there are reasons for that. One of them being that typically the founder of the company is going to have much more of an innovative mindset than whoever's going to come next, where the founder, they're going to be the one who kind of has all the ideas, they have the drive, and then the next CEO, typically their role is more to just try to maintain what was already happening before they joined the company. But when Apple makes that their goal to make a dent in the universe, all of a sudden there's going to be this constant mindset of how can we continue to do this? The goal isn't we just make great phones, or we just make great computers, or we sell music online. That's not the goal. The goal is to make a dent in the universe. So from the top down, there's this constant mindset and constant emphasis on doing everything you can to change the world. Thanks for watching, and I'd love it if you subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one.